So please welcome our panel for Culture and Heritage. Thank you, and I'm going to hand over to Rachel now, firstly, to talk about the baths.
Can I just start by saying what a joy it is to be able to welcome you all to this space, and that whilst it seems quite an unusual thing to welcome people to an empty swimming pool within an old Edwardian building, that I think what I really want to convey today is that this is very much in keeping with this building and what it was built for, so that you stand within a long tradition of people who have made use of this space, and this building has adapted and evolved as our local community has adapted and evolved since 1907. So just to give you a potted history of this building, where we are, it was bequeathed to the people of Balsall Heath through the Birmingham Corporation, which was the predecessor of the Birmingham City Council. And it was really a gift, along with the library, for Balsall Heath to be a part of this growing city, and this real desire to bring leisure facilities and learning and health to people in this kind of growing urban population. And right from the get-go, it was never just about being a swimming pool. So we're within the empty gala pool here, which was the first-class swimming pool. But alongside that, we had 46 washing baths in here where people can come and take a bath. It was about cleanliness. It was also about having these other spaces where that what you see in here, whilst it was a swimming pool, that these swimming pool spaces were very expensive and resource heavy to heat during the winter months. So pool 2, which is the existing pool, which you can still swim in, and please do have a look at the swim timetable before you go, you've only got a fortnight left, that it was covered over during the winter months, and it was used as a labour exchange, it was used as a billiards hall, it was used for tea dances in particular, and during the Second World War, when this area was under aerial bombardment, that during the Blitz it was used as a casualty department. So I've been privileged enough to interview somebody who was stationed as a nurse here, and she would sleep here overnight in dorms, and they would care for people as they walked through the door with injuries. So this space has always been about meeting the needs of the local community, and today we talk about mutual aid. So I recognise what has happened previously as this thing of mutual aid, about how we pitch in, and it makes absolute sense that we are here today and we are talking about how we can come together and how we can connect and how we can serve our neighbourhood of Balsall Heath in the 21st century. I think it's very much in keeping with that vision. And I'm really, really pleased to share some of the updates on what we've got coming, because we are just about to undergo our own retrofit. We are closing our doors on the 2nd of October until spring 2025, and we've got 2 phases of works. And we have been very lucky that a coalition of organisations came together and have managed to secure £32.5 million across 2 phases of work to essentially retrofit this building and to ensure that it continues its legacy of serving our local community. And really, you will notice that this is not just bricks and mortar that got thrown up for a swimming pool. This is a palace in a working class neighbourhood, and we really, really want to retain that. So just to give you a run through, and I've printed it off because there's so much happening. So we are, to start with, doing work on the roofs, that you will be aware, if you've come in on a rainy day, that we've got plenty of leaks in here. So roof repairs, and we are crucially ripping out our hungry gas-fired boilers that have been really quite unreliable, and we are replacing them with air source heat pumps. And there's going to be a lot of work to do that will be done on internal heat exchange. There will be a lot of work that will be done around internal insulation, secondary glazing. So we're really wanting to dramatically cut our energy bills and ensure that we are thinking really creatively about how we are using the heat within here. And there's a precedent of that as well, because upstairs we have what was the old laundry room, and part of the reason that we have our grade 2-star listing status is because we've got these beautiful old laundry racks, and those laundry racks that they dried the towels, and they are heated by the excess heat from heat elsewhere in the building. So they are steam heated drying racks. So that thing around heat exchange and thinking creatively about that actually the Edwardians had already got a little bit of an insight into that. The big thing that we're going to be doing is that we are knocking through between the baths and the library. So if you came in through the front entrance, that in about 18 months' time, you'll be able to take a right and you'll be able to walk directly into our neighbouring library, which will have an extra mezzanine floor. And what's going to be really beautiful is that we will have as part of that a whole space which will be for children. So there will be a tiered seating area where we can hopefully do some performances in there, and it will be just a really soft space where people can come and can be, that we're centering stories and narrative and play within our local library. What was the men's second-class slipper baths will be remodelled and will become a community cafe. We're doing reinforcement works to the basement, and what's absolutely crucial to us is that this building is accessible, so we're going to have ramped access at the front of the building. So that's our first phase of works, and then beyond that there will be a second phase where we're going to turn this into the main pool. So the pool where you're able to swim at the moment, that will become a community space, and hopefully we can have many more of these kind of events where we can continue to come together and we connect. But this will be the grandest local swimming pool in the country, that you'll be able to go up into the balconies here. So in 7 years' time, when you come here and you come for your swim, you can tell people that I came here and I, came to presentations here, I watched TV here, I ate cake in here, and people won't believe you at all. This will be the main pool, and then we will have our dedicated event space, which will be in the existing pool. In the women's slipper baths, I know Pauline here has been able to enjoy a bath. We've had a pilot activity this summer to see whether or not anybody would be interested in taking a bath, and the feedback that we're getting from that is that this can be a space, public services can provide necessary care. And this building really needs to be a safe and welcome space for people to land and to experience care. And we take that very, very seriously here. This is what we're aspiring to. So there will be a wellbeing hub in the women's slipper baths. There will be a gym in the old laundry room next to those beautiful heated drying racks, which I mentioned. And out the back, we're really excited that you can see at the moment we've got our little courtyard area, but you'll see beyond that there's an area which is used for parking. It's a little bit of a kind of dead space at the moment, but that's going to be a community growing space. And we've been working with local teenage girls to help to design that. So we've got a lot happening, and I think that thing around our heritage spaces, we know that in terms of buildings, that retrofitting and making use of these buildings is just far better than throwing up new buildings. But having this space here in particular, the reason that we created this as a living room space is because a living room is where people connect, you sit, you relax, you enjoy that kind of cuppa together. It's where we kind of come together, and that's really what we want to create in our community, because from that, absolutely beautiful things can flow. So I'm really excited to hear what comes of this for the rest of today. Thank you very much.
Hello, can you get this slide? Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm an architect in London, and I've been very much interested in retrofit and the climate. I've been in my practice trying to do low energy buildings, housing, trying different kinds of ideas. But I live in a conservation area and I work in a conservation area, and where I am, it's been very difficult to do much of anything because the answer would often be no. So very different challenges to hear perhaps. So during lockdown, I was quite motivated to write and put together this manual of retrofit in one conservation area as a case study, toolkit idea of how it could be analyzed in deeper detail, finer grain, to look at how we could do it in other places. So this is the book, and there's some copies available here, as was mentioned. We can go to the next. So if we kind of look at the context of retrofit, you know, all the councils, you know, 380 something councils out of the 400 and something have declared climate emergency, and they've declared 2030, and that's 7 years away. You know, how is that going to be possible? It's more optimistic than the UK's declaration of 2050, but they have good intentions. They've declared. But we, in our council, were saying, well, how are we going to achieve this? A lot of us had been in XR and been marching on the streets and involved in activism, but then we said the next stage is practicality. How can we sort of get things moving? So if you look at this declaration, it's quite immense, you know, to get your head around. Next. And if we look at the challenge, in the UK, our housing is perhaps 20% of all our carbon. It's a huge chunk of the carbon emissions of the country. In homes, Islington, London Borough of Islington, where I live, is 33%, so our council is a bit higher. LETI, which is the guide, London Energy, Low Energy Transformation Initiative, wrote the Climate Emergency Guide in 2021, and it's based on studies they've done, and they were estimating that a quarter of all homes have heritage features or architectural constraints. So if you think a quarter of all homes, of the almost 30 million homes, have some heritage and architectural constraints, that could be 5% of our carbon for the UK. Now, I want to expand on that a little bit more. Next slide. I'll expand on that a little bit later. But if we look at conservation areas, some areas in the country have very high levels of conservation. Westminster, the Isles of Scilly have 100%. They're completely covered in conservation. But Westminster is the next, with 78% of the land area under conservation. And Islington is 50. If you look at London, 17% of the land area of London is under conservation. London has a tenth of all the conservation areas in the country. So there's been a lot of work in making conservation in London. And it presents problems if you want to retrofit. Next slide. If we look at Birmingham, Birmingham isn't as big in terms of conservation areas. You can see the conservation areas here. And they're actually still in the process of making more conservation. Conservation areas are not static. The Act of Parliament mandates that councils have to designate and maintain conservation areas, and sometimes they need to declare new conservation areas. In Hackney, there was a new one made just 2 years ago. So it's happening all the time. And next slide. So these are the conservation areas in Birmingham. On the left, there's a list of them, but there are more possible. And on the website, there's consideration for 4 or 5 more listed here. So it's an ongoing process with more that perhaps may affect how we live. Next slide. So what is local character? And here I've looked at your neighborhood, and you know it's an area just outside city center. It's quite special. You know, in some places in the country, this would be a conservation area. It may become one. Next slide. And why? Just me not knowing the area, just looking, in Google Maps and roaming around, you could see there's an amazing Victorian heritage here with amazing details and really nice brick cornices. You can see the detail of the cornices and bracketing and different details of window details and doorways here. You find it in a lot of the terraces here. And this is what is architecturally constrained. It's not listed or actually maybe some are listed, I don't know. It's not actually in conservation, but it's architecturally constrained. You would not want to destroy the facade with external insulation. Yes?
Could you just
simplify
it a little bit? Maybe got a little bit rainfall. We're trying to just expand on conservation and some of the terminology.
Well, a conservation area is declared because it has an area of special interest, and it will have details that are important from not particularly maybe a building by building. It'll be the public realm, the street, and things that are sort of making this neighborhood environment special. So usually a conservation area will be because it's a group of buildings that create a village center or a special place. So, yeah. The government the government act of parliament has mandated local authorities must declare conservation areas if they have the power to do that. So the city of Birmingham has the power to do that in the planning department.
Perhaps I could just give, to root this in Birmingham real life, the nearest conservation area to us here is Moseley Village Centre, just down the road. And all the Moseley sort of shop fronts and the big high gables of the shops in Moseley. And the old church, St Mary's Church, which is a medieval church in Moseley. All of that together is thought of as a sort of, we all talk about Moseley Village, and it has a particular character there. And so that character is protected. Rather than it being a listed building which says, this building has very special architectural features and history, as this beautiful Edwardian Baroque building does. But the conservation area means that, in fact, the whole of that area is such that you wouldn't want someone to come in and just knock down one of those shops. Each shop on its own may be not that special, but when you put them all together, they add up to the character, the architectural character. But in many ways, the character in much more than that. The jewellery quarter is another one where there's a lot of typology of Georgian houses where people used to make jewellery. So it's really thinking about the... I hope that makes a bit more sense to understand what a conservation area is. Does that help? And we want to make this interactive, so please, anyone at any stage during the day, do just put up your hand and we'll take questions. Sorry, Krista, cutting across you there.
Oh, that's good. Okay, next slide, please. What's happening where I am, London Borough of Islington, has had all these amazing words, and the local plan says Islington's character may need to evolve in order to meet the needs of climate change. And also, as part of evolving character, the historic environment must be reconciled with environmental needs and aspirations of people. People are now part of the environmental mandate. A historic environment is not just what it looks like. We have to also think of climate change. So this is coming into the local plan, which is the legislation which is telling the council how to make the planning laws. Next. So how has it happened where I am in terms of local activism? We've had 3 organizations that have pushed this. You have this amazing things happening in Balsall Heath. In Islington, we had the Islington Environmental Alliance, which was a group that was set up to say, okay, you've declared net zero, what are you going to do about it? And we had 6 working groups, each one looking at transport, housing, different circular economy, different parts of the equation, and each one sort of saying to the councillors, okay, what are you doing? Going to meetings, attending planning meetings, attending scrutiny meetings, saying, what are you going to do? You have this declaration, how are we going to achieve this? So trying to get a dialogue with the community and the people running things. So that was happening. Go back, sorry. And then another one was Green Conservation Lobby. This is amazing because 2 women made this happen. 2 women set up a website and got more than 2,000 signatures of residents to say we need change. Just 2 people. Action can be done very, very amazing with 2. And then what I've been involved with, the Architects Climate Action Network, we put together a guidebook. It's almost like a pattern book of what you could do. And I'll talk about that later. Next. So in Islington, this is our heritage. These are actually listed Georgian buildings in this conservation area. But the problem we have is windows. These windows we were not allowed to change. These windows here are not original. The council would just say no. The council was reactive, and we wanted them to be proactive. We wanted them to change because of net zero to say how to do something. How can we do this? Rather than saying no. They would say, you ask us and we'll decide what you can do. And we said, that's not good enough. Next. So in terms of comfort, 81% of all the houses in my neighborhood have single glazing. People living with uncomfortable conditions. This is my house. I measured with infrared camera on a cold winter day, about 0 degrees. The surface of the glass was 8.6. That was the surface temperature of the glass in a single glazed window. And you can see the houses with the heat loss, the red coming out of the windows. And that's where the exchange is happening, the drafts by the windows. And that's the problem we've had. We haven't been allowed to change them. Next slide. So this activist organization, these 2 women set this up to say we need change. And they got 2,000 people to say, how can we make this happen, council? What can be done next? And so this is the petition, and the council is a labor-controlled council. It was 100% labor councillors, but Greens have been making steady progress. We had 1 Green councillor last election, now we have 3. So labor is seeing that people want change, and they're voting for it. They're putting Green councillors in power. And so they know that they need to do more. And this has helped. So we had a full debate in council in July, and the council is doing a lot. I'll show you next. So what we're asking the council to do, this is what the council had, environmental design planning, a guide, and urban design. These are supplementary documents that the council puts out to say, if you want to do changes, here's what you can do. And we were saying these guides are not good enough. Camden did a much better one, Home Improvements. It was written in 2020, and energy adaptation, efficiency and adaptation, trying to give residents, guidance on what they could do because of the problems with heritage a lot. And we were saying that these aren't detail. Next, please. So we want to see how can you do these things. We want them to help us to tell us in our particular houses what you could do, where you could insulate, about ventilation, about windows, about solar and heat pumps. What are the principles that could be done next? And every neighborhood is different. So you need to do an analysis. These are the roof typologies where I am, and there's a lot of these butterfly roofs, other types of roofs here. So the idea is to analyze what local knowledge, what kinds of problems you have, and then the flat roofs and the roofs that have been changed. So some of these roofs you can actually do a lot with. Next. How to do extensions, how to insulate extensions on houses. Really detail like this. Next. And details of windows. Windows has been a real sticking point. If we're going to go really to net zero, we need to get things in a really good way. And this is particular windows and actual companies and actual technologies and details. And if you look at the energy saving, a single unit glass window is 1, and you can go all the way up to 6 times the savings on a triple glazed window. And the various stages along the way. We want the council to tell us, you could use this window or this window in these types of houses. If they provide us clarity, then residents can actually decide, okay, I could do this, or I'll wait to do this in 2 years. You give us a time frame. Next. So this is what we want. We want these design guides. I won't go into detail, but we really want detail, and the council now is doing it. Next. They set up stakeholder meetings. In June, they had a residents' workshop that we pushed, and we got 80 people to attend, and they heard again and again, how do we fix our windows? How do we insulate our roofs? What can we do? Architects and planners, housing associations came to another meeting, and then local business. So they organized these feedback workshops so that the residents and local organizations could feedback to say what this guide and what we could get. Next. So this is what they're doing, and they have a guidance document that we're almost on the end, and that this guidance is going to come to residents to give feedback on. We have a month of feedback on this, and then there'll be another draft that we feedback. So they're coming to us to get opinion. Next, please. That's the end. Yeah. So it gives you an idea where residents can push, and actually we got them to hire 4 new staff members. We got some change.
Chris, a fascinating talk, thank you. And I was reminded during that talk of the Amy Winehouse song. They told me to go to rehab, but but it's kind of, I wanted to put in energy efficient windows, and they said no, no, no. But Chris is giving us the answers that we can actually say yes, yes, yes. And I think we've got copies of Chris's book at the back here, the ACAN Climate Emergency Toolkit. Do look at it, and we can continue the conversation further. But I'm going to hand over now to Sara Hadi, who's got a different cultural take, a heritage and culture take on this. Do welcome Sara.
Hello everyone, lovely to be here, thank you, and so inspiring to hear from both of you about people-led social change. So I run Mimar Collective, which is a community arts organisation. I set it up a couple of years ago because I wanted to be in a position to create projects that are in response to needs that are not being met by mainstream arts. And having worked in community engagement roles in various settings before. So we were given a platform by the Commonwealth Games Festival to run a drama project. That was our first project under this label. And it was called Where Two Oceans Meet. It's a drama project designed around the needs of young Muslim women. Sorry about this, I'm not very good with these things. Because it's a group that normally faces a lot of barriers when it comes to performing arts. So I wanted to give them an opportunity to really experience every aspect of theatre, from creating a script, characters, set, everything, and performance. So we had a group of young people who only 2 of them had had any previous acting experience. They were from a range of BAME backgrounds. 2 of them were in foster care, a couple of them had additional mental health support needs. And they created and produced and performed a play, which was presented right here in a community venue in Balsall, Heath last year. And they astonished everyone. Nobody could believe that this was a group of people, young people, who had not had this kind of experience before. It was a sold-out performance, and everybody, the audience, was wowed. So the reason I'm saying all this is because, I just feel like this project illustrated a few concepts, which is that when people, the most care that we took over this project was in creating a space where all our participants were really held and they felt respected and valued and heard. And this really was what enabled them to achieve what they did. They were amazing at how they supported each other, and with the quality of the work that they produced. So, so I just feel really passionate about the fact that when you give people ownership and you give them agency and you really see the best in them, they're able to achieve amazing results. And what's important is the relationships. What is important, it's got to be relevant to them. It's got to be it's got to be, when you have something that's relevant, people take it on, and they take it to another level that you wouldn't expect. And if you want to create a movement which has its own momentum, this is, I feel, is the real key over here. And I'm sure people like Amran later on will mention, so if we think about the Pakistani community, for example, we're having climate emergencies all across the world. We can see natural disasters left, right, and center. But for example, the recent floods in Pakistan, that's something that really is close to home for that particular community. So it's just, for me, it's like making the link between what's happening, making the link and making it really, really close and personal. People will respond. And then once you have ownership, as I said, I think the basis of this, all this, is laying those foundations in those relationships. And if that's based on seeing the best in people, if that's based on valuing what each person has to contribute, that's how change can occur. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sara. Fantastic contribution. And I think, the point that really strikes me is when people are met and given a safe space, all these issues can come up for them and can be held and really can go forward. So we had some contributions yesterday about, is the environmental agenda important to people? Well, I think it's important to everyone in lots of different ways. But, heritage and culture and environment, they're the sort of three pillars we're talking about here. And at any point, if anyone's got particular questions or contributions from the floor, then do just wave your hand and we'll bring people in. We want to make this as much of a conversation as we possibly can. But I just, as a sort of, as a question really to our panelists, I'd like to just ask each of you to respond to the question about what do you feel are the tensions and compromises between heritage on the one hand and the environmental agenda on the other hand. Are there tensions and compromises here to be made between the two? Have we got a hand up at the back there for a question? Yes, okay.
On that subject, I've just, if people Google Mary Smale, BBC, you'll see about a woman who lives in Ashbourne, Derbyshire, who's been taken to court by her local council for putting solar panels on her house because it's in a conservation heritage area. But she's, alerting the fact that it's extreme climate emergency, we need to be taking this action. She's not only being taken to court, but she's got potentially going to be sent to prison for it. It's like there's an injunction against her doing this. So we need to support people, and it's a real serious tension. There's this tension, urgency to be acting to, address this extreme situation that we're all in, but we're just beleaguered by legislation and things, which obviously is important to protect beautiful buildings and things, but we need to make these changes at scale, and it needs to be streamed up to make it possible without persecuting people in the process.
Thank you. So there's a contribution from the floor that, just to paraphrase briefly for those online, it's really the point we were making earlier about no. Someone in Ashbourne, Derbyshire, who was on the BBC News in the last couple of days, who's put solar panels on their house and to try and save and respond to the extreme environmental emergency, but is being threatened with a court injunction and a prison sentence for doing this. If you could make it brief, Tony. Yes.
Pictures of as you have, the 100-foot greenhouse for growing in Cannon Hill Park, which we've been given permission to take over for a community takeover. So that's very much a project which is ongoing at the moment. And speak to Takir or
Lovely. So Takir and Tony, just put your hands up again. This wonderful project in Cannon Hill Park, just down the road here, to try and restore a 100-foot-long heritage greenhouse and do incredible things with it. So that's fantastic. Thank you. Takir, did you have another point?
Very brief about heritage. I think the question is whose heritage, and I think the key thing is agency, and it's about empowerment, and empowerment with dignity and respect on there. So we see things in a very kind of, the English heritage. That's what we're really talking about when we're talking about these on there. And I think the key thing is when you have a diverse community, it's very much on there, it's very much listening. And then that agency for change, but the point I want to make is that to continue that work on there has to be something that where people can contribute. And I feel like where people can feel like they have an investment, that's where we start to see nourishment and continuous kind of elevation. So that's what I want to share with you guys.
Thank you, Tokir. Really, really powerful point, beautifully made. And for those who couldn't catch all that, the question about heritage starts with whose heritage, and giving people agency, giving people respect, making a safe place where multiple voices and different heritages can be heard. Is that a fair summary, Tokir? Thank you. Imi at the front here.
Thank you. I was just going to say, just building on that whose heritage, we've got an experience of this in Ladywood with the amazing work that so many community activists did to tell the story of the Tower Ballroom and its history and what it had meant to many different communities. And for a number of different reasons, it was like most of that was ignored and demolished. And it really does raise this question about whose history and what is perceived as heritage. Of course, being in an incredible building like this, you can see really, really clearly why and how we need to save it. And it's such a great example of how you build 100 to 300 year buildings. But I think that question of whose heritage really shows up then in like what we were talking about yesterday about whose heritage or things are disposable. We can see that happening in the Ladywood regeneration, what feels like you can get rid of because it doesn't fit a certain story of what matters. And I think that is really, really critical. I just wanted to share that. But I also wanted to just ask a question to the panel, particularly to Rachel, because I know a little bit about you as well. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on like the role of infrastructure like this in a climate emergency. Like, what can you imagine this building may also, like we may also need to be honest that we may need to use it for? What do we need to prepare for? And just like, I think the one little connection is just the idea of even though this is heritage built in the image of a certain time of society, that it can change and it can be relevant to like different communities at different times. And I just think that's a beautiful example of what's happening here in Balsall Heath. So there's just a few connections, but to what the situation we find ourselves in Ladywood, but also really a question back, like what do you see in the intersection of public infrastructure and the worst of the climate crisis?
So I think, first of all, I think we need to do away with this notion that heritage, with this notion that heritage is something that's preserved in aspic, that you walk into this building and it does not look the same as it did when it opened in 1907, nor should it. That we will preserve around 95% of the fabric of this building, but the coalition of organisations that are investing in this building and that are part of this coalition of organisations that are looking to the future of this building, that they understand that this space evolves and adapts and changes. And a case in point will be when next time you go for a swim in pool 2, look at the end and you will see a door that really shouldn't be there. And the reason that door was put in there was so that ambulances could get in when it was used as a casualty department. Obviously, we have to adapt and change. And this thing around whose stories and whose histories, that I think there's a recognition. I'm really proud to be part of a programme which is funded by the National Lottery Heritage Funds, where they are allowing us to pilot activities to say, okay, let's turn this into a living room. And then through doing that, we're giving people the opportunity to take up space. And I think that thing around how can we adapt this space? What role can this space play? What role can this building play in being fit for the future, as well as us doing the retro bit? That is really for us to decide collectively. And what we can do is we can create the space as a civic space, as a third space, where people come in and We're really explicit when people walk into this building that this is a building that was built for the people of Birmingham, for the people of Balsall Heath. It was gifted to us. And the Friends of Moseley Road Baths, and I'm very proud to be a member since we were formed in 2006, we made very clear that this should remain as a public building owned by Birmingham City Council. And the reason for that was to ensure that it remained under ownership of the people of Balsall Heath and Birmingham. Now, it doesn't always feel as though you've got much agency in that. I'm very aware that in the day-to-day that sense of ownership and connection. But this is what we're wanting to foster, this notion that you walk in here and it belongs to you. And it belongs to you if you've been swimming here for 7 decades, as some people have. Or if you landed in Balsall Heath last week, it is still yours. So this thing of us connecting to this building and finding those solutions together, and the beauty of a heritage building like this, and so many heritage buildings, is that they are flexible enough, is that they can change in use. Whereas we have so many buildings that they are built for one use. And when they no longer fulfill that use, that's when they get knocked down. And you see that happening across Birmingham, where you've got buildings that no longer, these shop units that as soon as those shops can't make a buck, then you knock them down. Whereas these buildings that can be adapted and changed. So I think the answer is in terms of how this building can serve the changing needs of the climate crisis. I don't know, but that's for us to work out together. And we want to make very explicit an invitation that we want people with us on that journey. And that's what we'll be looking to do as we develop plans for the next 5 years, that people to work with us and because we've got a public space, because we've got this building that belongs to us, and hopefully a team who are linked in with our local community and receptive to what people want, that we can continue to do that.
I'm just going to let our panelists respond, but those who haven't had a question, I will come back to you. And I just want to reference Pat Richards is at the back there, and has just bringing in the Caribbean heritage of this area. Pat was hugely involved in the Windrush 75th anniversary celebration services and supper dance a week ago in Balsall Heath, and that whole Caribbean heritage has been so important around here, and particularly sort of links in many people who have that heritage with the incredible statesmanship of Moseley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, who has talked very passionately about reparations, and many of those Caribbean islands are already being affected by climate change in ways which are very very serious, and it puts into complete context the piece by Faisal Hussain, Climate Justice Equals Racial Justice. So big call out to Pat and the African Caribbean heritage of this area as well. But I am going to come back to the panelists, Sara and Chris. Okay, Chris, to respond. There have been so many points about heritage and the environmental emergency, etc.
Thanks. A couple of things to say. Heritage has defined within the sort of heritage guidance that you may have a particular building that's quite old, but there may have been significant changes to that building over time. And if you take a project now, you may not actually want to rip out those changes and take a building back to 17 whatever, because some of those changes over time have been significant and quite interesting. The problem has been that it's stopped. And we're not allowed to sort of take it forward. And we, as residents, we as users of these buildings need to say, well, this is evolving, and we need to think the future climate change adaptation could be another variation of change that is happening to these buildings. These buildings, as was said, should be flexible. And the best old buildings are very flexible. Terrace houses are very good at flexibility. And all of these houses have had a major renovation. Our old houses have already been through a major retrofit. When indoor plumbing, when we put in bathrooms and toilets and showers and heating, plumbing and heating and electricity was installed in these houses where you had an outhouse at the back, a privy, you had fires to heat yourself. These buildings have been drastically modernized and updated, and now we need to go through another change, and the buildings should be adapted and flexible to do that. And then one last point was that in my area, in Islington, a woman was going to be fined £20,000 for putting in double glazed windows, and the head of conservation said that it was an affront that she just did it without permission, and we're going to slap a £20,000 fine. But politically, a councillor stepped in and said, no, you can't do this. The councillors are ultimately the ones who have the power, and they said, our residents don't want this kind of level of restriction. We need to adapt, and that this particular thing has to change, and that's led to some of our changes. So in responding to the solar panels, we've had it where people have done things on their own, and then they've been confronted with this legal mechanism, either a fine or various other things. We need to get to the point where we have a conversation with our local governments and say, we as residents need to adapt our buildings, and that we need to have a dialogue about how we can adapt our buildings and work together.
I just wanted to add that I think at the same time, what's really important is not only do we have sort of the community who's negotiating with government and demanding change, but at the same time, there are still a lot of residents who would be empowered by understanding more. So if we really understand the ins and outs, if we understand what we have the right to demand, or what will make a change, what will make a difference to our lives, then we will empower those people to join this movement. And I think there's a real need. There's a lot of people who need more information in a gentle way, not in a way of nothing, but in a way of with respect. I think that's really important.
Thank you so much, Sara. There was someone who hadn't spoken from the floor. There was a hand up earlier. Pauline.
Thanks, John. My name is Pauline Roach. I'm a local resident, and I've lived in England since 1984, and I came swimming here all those years ago, and I've been still come back here. I've been to other pools around the city, and my heart remains in Balsall Heath, and it's a great place to come back to. And what I love about the close down of this building is that it's not a kind of a shut. The door's not shutting in our faces. It feels like we're shutting together. We're being drawn into the organisation, and it's our place. It's our place that's shutting down, but we're still part of it. And I know, because Rachel's involved in it, that the communication will continue. She's always been great at communicating what's happening, and it's just. I'm not ashamed to say that I've had two baths here since the slipper baths were reopened, and I'm looking forward to the third one. And when the first bath, I cried because I don't have a bath in where I live now, and having been able to come and have a bath in a place where I felt held by a community that cares about me was just magic, and it's just great to be part of this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pauline, for sharing, and we can see with the emotion it brings up for you that these are really emotional memories as well. And I'm reminded that yesterday we were talking about, communicating from a heart level is so important on this. So I think if we can look at our heritage and we can really understand at that deep, heartfelt level that this is not just an academic sort of dry policy paper in a government, local government office somewhere we're talking about. This is really people's lives. And I want to just reference, and I'd invite any comments on this, Dame Fiona Reynolds, who was the chair of the National Trust for many years, was confronted, I think going back about 20 years now, with a real sort of head-on collision between heritage and the environmental agenda. And many National Trust houses, which obviously, stately homes and these sorts of things around the country, were saying, oh, we can't possibly do anything because, we're a serious heritage building. But Fiona Reynolds, the chair of the National Trust, and we're, as Rachel has said, really grateful that the National Trust have taken an interest in our baths here in Balsall Heath. Dame Fiona Reynolds said, there is no, we haven't got got a choice to choose between heritage and climate. If we don't do the climate stuff to mitigate as far as we can the climate and ecological emergency through which we're living and which is snowballing day by day, then there will be no heritage to preserve. So I think it's perhaps as stark as that in some ways. And I don't know. Rachel's nodding her head. Perhaps you'd like to comment on that, or anyone else from the panel here.
I mean, for me, I think it's that thing of this collective care and us actually together as a community feeling invested in something. And I think this is a beacon for our neighbourhood of what is possible. And when we centre care and when we centre those important stories, we can't retain every little bit of fabric, nor should we. But that thing around centering it around care and what's important, because in this period of climate change, when things are moving so fast and so many things are being lost, it's about what do we retain and how do we come together. And we come together with heart. That's how we come together. Because when we feel invested in something, then we're involved in conserving something, in protecting something, in fighting for something. And that has to come through these connections. And if that means running somebody a bath, then that's what we do. If it means giving somebody a plant, then that's what we do. If it means serving a cup of tea to somebody, that's what we do. So I think we really want this to be an exemplar project, but we know that what we're doing here reflects what happens elsewhere in our neighbourhood, whether it's celebrated or not. And I think these moments, that whilst they may seem quite mundane and quite everyday, that they have to be at the heart of the world that we want to build and the world that we want to preserve as well. So I think these things are really, really crucial. So there is a link between running a bath for somebody and conserving a heritage building. These things are not separate. So when people have a sense of care, when they walk down a road and they see that that's been beautifully preserved, but has adapted to ensure that everybody on that street is not cold in their front rooms, that these are things about care and centering people, that these are not diametrically opposed. So we centre people and we do things with heart.
What a beautiful way of putting it, Rachel. Thank you so much. Coming together with heart. And I just want to bring in the people side, coming perhaps back to Chris, who was talking so eloquently earlier about in his area how people had campaigned to preserve the local area, but also to limit their fuel bills. And in the slides of Balsall Heath street frontages, which Chris was showing earlier, I think when we were starting out in Balsall Heath, Angie Page, who was on the panel yesterday, who's not here at the moment, but Angie Page, who wouldn't consider herself an architectural historian or anything, but when I first had a conversation with her about what about, insulating your house and everything, her first response was, I hope you're not going to slap polystyrene on the front of my house, John. And so I was able to reassure her that many of us feel that all these street frontages in Balsall Heath, which will never be in a conservation area like Moseley or the Jewellery Quarter, will never be listed buildings, but nevertheless they have a sort of social, a heart importance to us, our streets, which I think we want to preserve. Many people have said this to me as we've gone around, and we fought a long campaign with the retrofit program we've been doing that we didn't want external wall insulation put on the front of the houses. We were happy to have it on the sides and the backs, but not on the front, as we've modelled with the zero carbon house on Tyndall Street. I'll come back to you in a second, noted. But Chris, just from the Islington perspective, any observations on that?
Several things. This has brought us into community. The activism that has happened has made people talk to each other. I mean, there was a lot of under COVID crisis, there was a building of community. And this has been evolving through these various different activist groups. There's there's intersectionality between different projects and different things happening. There is the zero carbon move toward insulation, retrofitting our houses, but there's also how do we use our streets? And there's been a huge movement where I live with people-friendly streets and taking back streets and parklets. And there have been groups of residents who will occupy a parking space and set up a parklet and have cake and tea and have an event on the street. And you can extend, the frontage of the house to the street. And what's happening is that we're asking the council to put more planting on the streets, to provide cycle lanes, to make more active travel happening on our streets, to make our streets extensions of our homes, places that we can use and live in, is important as well. But there's been a coming together, and I've met so many people through this that I would never have met otherwise. And monthly meetings about various things at people's houses has been happening for the last few years. It's been quite amazing, sort of building up a community. And just one last thing, that some people just take on a project. It's amazing what can do. A couple people took on a project to set up a climate center. The council wasn't doing it. Let's make a climate center. Let's find an empty shop, which the business owners who are responsible for that let us use the shop and occupy it for a climate center. So we could have the films, we could have the talks, we could have the social gatherings, we could have toy exchange, things happening. That's been something that's been growing as well. More of this kind of thing.
Many thanks, Chris. Another contribution from the floor, and then we're going to have to wrap up. All right, one very brief one, perhaps from Joe at the back as well. But
thanks. We're here from Small Heath, Friends of Digby Park, and thank you so much to Rachel, Sara, and Chris. I'd just like to pick up on what Chris mentioned about how some locals in Islington, just generally other areas, there's a focus on councils, and we've heard of various stories. If someone's put some solar panels up, the council is taking the poor lady to court, and then within Small Heath, people can do what they like, and the council will drive past the local police. There's so many extensions and what have you, and no one's batting an eyelid. So we want to see where are the young artists, the craftivists, the activists. We're doing what we can, but we're small. We're not going to exhaust ourselves. So we're really great. We're really happy to be here today. We want to soak it all up and take from yourselves, and we're really inspired. So yeah, look forward to catching up with people. But yeah, there's a lot to say, but I'll let you move on. Thank you so much.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. Tell me your name.
Shaheen.
Shaheen from Small Heath Park. So just to paraphrase that quickly for those who may not have caught all that, doing amazing work in Small Heath to conserve the park there, some of the issues of people just putting extensions around, and an opportunity and an invitation for young artists and creative people to become involved with that. And thank you for referencing the inspiration of that. I'm sorry, we've got one other at the back, and you've had to go, Tony. So there's
Library next door is our major link, really, with language and the power of sharing this.
The library next door is our major link with language and the power of sharing. Absolutely. Thank you. This can be our climate centre. I think in many ways it already is. It's wonderful to think of it. I think of it as the mothership of Retrofit Balsall Heath. So I don't know if any of our panel just have closing remarks. We're slightly over time now, but it's been such a rich discussion. Thank you to everyone who's contributed from the floor, and any just closing remarks. Perhaps just go across.
We're open for another 2 weeks. Please make use of us. We've got this open invitation. Come here, swim, connect. We've got our living room space that's open 10 o'clock until 6 o'clock weekdays, 10 o'clock, 4 o'clock till weekends, that please come and absorb it and be part of it. And some of our programming will go off-site when we close. There will be further activities that we'll be doing into this autumn. So please just be a part of it and link with people and get to know people. It's through those connections that we can really begin to shape things collectively.
Thank you. I'm really inspired to be hearing from Rachel and Chris what's possible, especially here, through this lovely building and what's to come with the library. And just to say that there's so much that's possible and there's so much more to do. So yes, let's all of us take this forward and do our best.
I'd like to say it's important to share local knowledge between communities, and I think the fact that Retrofit Imagined is now moving around the country is great, because before it was here last year. I mean, I'm coming from inner London. There's very different problems, but there are things we can share, common things, and it's been inspiring to see what's happening here. The fact that 500 houses have been retrofitted here is amazing. And we're at the earlier stage. We're just trying to get permission to do it. We haven't gotten that point of doing it. And we can share stories, and that will inspire us across the country.
And just we're over time, but it's been such a rich discussion. I hope you'll agree it's been well worth it. And I hope that this last hour has demonstrated completely that rather than heritage and high architecture and so forth, and the environment and the climate crisis being in opposition. In fact, there are many ways in which heritage and culture is actually a way into this agenda. And just as a final example, broadening this out a bit further, some of you will be well aware that in Birmingham we're fighting a campaign to save Smallbrook Ringway, which I'm wearing the T-shirt for at the moment. It's a 1960s building in the city centre, which there's a planning application to demolish the whole building and erect 55-storey glass towers with rental flats in them. And in many senses, I can see people in the audience just shaking their heads who haven't even heard of this perhaps so far. But in many senses, examples like this bring together, in I hope, an unstoppable alliance, heritage issues, cultural heritage issues, and environmental issues, because those Smallbrook Ringway buildings are important to many people from a heritage cultural point of view, that those are the buildings which in the 1960s were erected by many of the people who were moving to this city from all over the world, and there's lots of documentary evidence about that. Also, they have cultural heritage, that it was the centre of the clubbing scene for many who grew up in this city right through. In architectural history, perhaps it's still a period which is unfashionable, but is increasingly being looked at. But all those cultural heritage issues mitigate, and cultural memory and so forth. We were referenced a book yesterday about all those issues. All those issues move towards wanting to preserve those buildings. And in this time of climate and ecological emergency, there's an absolute imperative that we can't go on ripping down buildings, any sort of buildings, let alone locally listed culturally heritage buildings, and putting up new buildings, because the carbon footprint of that is astronomic. And one of the campaigns I'm involved with has the slogan, the greenest building is the one which already exists. So in campaigns like this, and we're not alone, there are other campaigns up and down the country, the Marks and Spencer's case in London recently. But I think these things indicate that in fact there is a great coming together, I think, of cultural and heritage issues and the environmental agenda. So please join me in giving a huge hand of applause to Rachel, Sara and Chris, our panellists here today.